There was a time in this country when a man understood the difference between teasing his wife and humiliating her. He knew that a small joke shared in the warmth of a kitchen between two people who had built a life together was a very different thing from a public mockery delivered in front of cameras and strangers. He knew that a real man defended his wife in public, even when he disagreed with her in private. But what happened on Family Feud 1, warm Wednesday afternoon in early April, would prove that some men have forgotten that distinction so completely that they cannot even see themselves crossing the line while they are doing it. And when 52-year-old Bernard Caldwell stepped up to that buzzer and humiliated his wife in front of 200 strangers and millions of viewers at home, Steve Harvey did something that the longtime host had been holding back from doing for years. He fired back. He fired back with the kind of clean, controlled, surgical precision that only a man who had been raised right by his own mother could fire back. And the moment he was finished firing back, the entire studio understood, all at once, that they had just witnessed Steve Harvey teach a public masterclass on what real respect for a wife actually sounds like. Her name was Patricia Caldwell. She was 49 years old. She worked as a billing manager for a small dental practice in a quiet suburb of Detroit, Michigan. And she had been married to Bernard Caldwell for the past 22 years. She was a soft-spoken woman, the kind of woman who wore her hair in the same neat shoulder-length style she had worn since she was 30. The kind of woman who packed her own lunch in the same small, insulated bag every morning. The kind of woman who quietly remembered the birthdays of every coworker in the dental office and brought in a small grocery store cake on each of those days, without ever being asked. She was also a woman who, for reasons that would become clear in the next 20 minutes of stage time, had been carrying a particular kind of shame inside herself for almost a decade. A shame about her body, a shame about her weight, a shame that her own husband, the man standing 3 feet away from her on the Family Feud stage, had been feeding quietly and consistently for the past 9 years. The Caldwell family from Detroit faced off against the Mendez family from San Antonio. The Caldwells were behind by 60 points, going into the second round. Bernard Caldwell, 52 years old, an assistant manager at a large auto parts retailer, had been the loudest member of the family lineup. He had been trying too hard for the cameras. He had been making jokes that were landing politely but not quite getting the laughs he had clearly been hoping for. The audience could feel it. Steve Harvey could feel it. And Bernard Caldwell, like a lot of men who do not know how to handle a room that is not quite laughing at their jokes, was about to make the wrong choice about how to fix it. To understand the weight of what happened on that stage, you have to understand who Patricia Caldwell really was. She had been born in 1976 in a working-class neighborhood on the east side of Detroit, the youngest of 3 children in a family that had loved her deeply, but had never quite known what to do with the quiet, bookish little girl who had been born to 2 outgoing, loud, life-of-the-party parents. Her father had been a Chrysler line worker for 34 years. Her mother had been a postal clerk who knew every customer in the neighborhood by name and who held court at the front counter of the post office the way a queen holds court in a throne. Patricia had not been like them. She had been quiet. She had been heavy from the time she was 8 years old, the way some children just are, despite eating the same dinners and playing in the same yards as their thinner siblings. And she had grown up in a household where her weight had been a constant, gentle, never quite cruel but never quite kind. Subjum. ECT, a family conversation. Her mother had not been a cruel woman. Her mother had loved her. But her mother had also been the kind of Midwestern black mother who believed that calling a thing what it was, out loud, in front of company, was a form of honesty rather than a form of harm. Her mother had said things at the dinner table, in front of Patricia's aunts and uncles, about Patricia's plate, about Patricia's portions, about what Patricia was going to look like by the time she was a teenager if she did not slow down. Patricia had absorbed those small, public corrections the way a sponge absorbs water. By the time she was 16, she had stopped eating in front of other people entirely. She ate alone in her bedroom. She ate alone in the school library at lunch. She ate alone in the car after work in her 20s, parked in a parking lot somewhere, finishing a meal she did not want anybody to see her finishing. She had met Bernard Caldwell in 2002 at the wedding of a mutual friend. Bernard had been 30 then. Charming, loud, full of compliments. He had told Patricia in the parking lot of the reception hall that she was the most beautiful woman in the room. He had told her she had skin like honey and eyes like her grandmother had owned the moon. Patricia, who had not been told she was beautiful by a man before in any real way, had believed him. She had married him within 14 months. For the first few years of their marriage, Bernard had continued to tell her she was beautiful. He had bought her dresses. He had taken pride in walking into rooms with her on his arm. Patricia had felt, for the first time in her life, like she was the kind of woman a man could be proud of. But somewhere around 2015, after Patricia had gone through a difficult menopause and gained about 25 pounds that her body did not want to give back, Bernard had changed. He had not announced the change. He had not had a single big conversation about it. He had simply, slowly, started doing the same thing Patricia's mother had done to her at the dinner tables of her childhood. He had started making small public comments. At family barbecues, at his work parties, at church socials. He would say things like, "Patricia, you sure you need another piece of that pie, baby?" He would say it with a smile. He would say it like he was joking. He would say it in front of his brother, in front of his co-workers, in front of the women who served the food. Patricia had stood 3 feet away from him each time, with the same small smile she had been perfecting since she was 8 years old, and she had not said anything. She had simply gone home, taken off her shoes, sat at the kitchen table in the dark, and eaten the rest of whatever it was she had been eating, alone, the way she had been eating since she was 16. She had tried twice to talk to Bernard about it. The first time, in 2018, she had told him quietly, in their own bedroom, that his comments hurt her. Bernard had laughed. He had told her she was being too sensitive. He had told her that if she could not take a joke from her own husband, she had a thin skin problem and not a weight problem. The second time, in 2021, she had tried again. Bernard had told her that if she did not want him to comment on her weight, she should do something about her weight. He had said it in the gentle, slightly disappointed voice that some men use when they want their wives to feel like the problem in the marriage is the wife herself. Patricia had not brought it up a third time. She had instead started seeing a quiet, careful therapist in late 2022, a black woman in her 60s named Dr. Inez Brooks, who specialized in food and body issues in older black women. Patricia had been seeing Dr. Brooks twice a month for almost 2 years by the time the Family Feud appearance came up. She had not told Bernard about the therapy. She had not told anybody about the therapy. The Ayet medical building near her dental practice was the only hour of her week that belonged entirely to her. The Family Feud appearance had been Bernard's idea. He had filled out the application himself, partly because he thought it would be fun, and partly because he was the kind of man who liked the idea of being on television. Patricia had not wanted to go. She had told Bernard, very quietly, that she did not feel comfortable being on camera. Bernard had told her she was being silly. He had told her she would look great. He had told her the whole family was excited and that she could not back out now. Patricia, who had spent 22 years learning how not to disappoint her husband, had said yes. She had packed her best burgundy dress, a dress she had bought 3 years earlier and had only worn twice, both times, to funerals. And she had gotten on a plane to Atlanta with a small knot of dread in her chest that she had not been able to name until the moment her husband stepped up to that buzzer in the second round. The first round had gone poorly for the Caldwells. Bernard had been off his game. He had given a wrong answer on the toss-up. He had been outpaced on the buzzer by the Mendez family father, a quick-witted man in his 50s who had been clearly enjoying himself. The Caldwell family had fallen behind by 60 points by the end of the first round. Bernard had not handled it well. He had been gripping the buzzer too hard. He had been trying to crack jokes between questions to recover the energy of the audience, but the jokes had not been landing. He had been sweating slightly under the studio lights. Patricia, on the far end of the lineup in her burgundy dress, had been smiling the small, careful smile she had been perfecting since she was 8 years old. She had been hoping, quietly, that her husband would settle down. She had been hoping, even more quietly, that she would not have to answer any questions herself. Then came the second round. Steve Harvey turned to the screen and read the question off his blue card. We surveyed 100 women. Name something you stopped doing in public because of something your husband said. The audience laughed, but it was a different kind of laugh than the previous rounds had received. It was a quieter, more uncertain laugh. The laugh of a room that recognized the category had teeth. Bernard Caldwell won the buzzer. He stepped up, and Bernard Caldwell, in the moment that would define the next 10 minutes of stage time and the next 6 months of his marriage, made the wrong choice. He decided to be funny. He decided to play the room. He decided that the way out of his bad first round was to lean into a joke at his wife's expense. The same kind of joke he had been telling for 9 years at family barbecues and church socials. The kind of joke that had always gotten a laugh from the people he wanted to impress. Bernard leaned into the microphone with a big grin. "Steve," he said, "I know exactly what my wife would say to this. My wife stopped eating dessert in public after I told her. Baby, you do not need that second piece of cake." He laughed. He laughed loud and confident, the way a man laughs when he is sure the room is about to laugh with him. He turned and looked at Patricia, expecting her to be smiling, that small, careful smile she always smiled when he made these kinds of jokes. The audience did not laugh. There was no laughter. There was a small, awful silence that filled the studio in the half-second after Bernard's punchline. The Mendez family across the stage did not laugh. The Caldwell daughters on the lineup did not laugh. And Patricia Caldwell, in her burgundy dress on the far end of the lineup, did not smile her small, careful smile. For the first time in 9 years, Patricia did something different. She lowered her eyes. She turned her face slightly away from her husband, and she put one hand on the lineup railing in front of her, as if she needed to hold on to something to stay upright. The cameras caught all of it. The cameras caught Bernard's confused expression as he realized the joke had not landed. They caught Patricia's lowered eyes. They caught the silence in the audience. And they caught the slow, deliberate change in Steve Harvey's face as he registered, in real time, exactly what had just happened on his stage. Steve did not freeze. He did not perform shock for the cameras. He simply set his blue card down on the side table next to him, very carefully, as if he was placing it somewhere he would need to find it again in a moment. He turned slightly so that his body was angled toward Bernard, and he said in a voice that was deliberately calm and deliberately quiet, "Sir, can I ask you something?" Bernard, still trying to recover the energy of the room, said, "Sure thing, Steve." "What is it?" Steve nodded slowly. "Sir," he said, "was that a joke you tell at home or was that a joke you tell in public?" Bernard's grin faltered. He laughed nervously. "Both, Steve," he said. "It is the kind of thing me and my wife joke about all the time. We are a fun couple." Steve nodded again. He turned his head and looked at Patricia, who had still not raised her eyes from the lineup railing. "Miss Patricia," Steve said gently. "Yes, Mr. Harvey," Patricia whispered. Her voice was so soft that the production crew had to adjust her microphone gain on the cramp spot. "Miss Patricia, is that the kind of joke your husband tells in public often?" Patricia did not answer right away. She lifted her eyes very slowly and she looked at Steve Harvey. The look she gave him was not a look of betrayal. It was not a look of accusation. It was simply the look of a woman who had been asked an honest question on a stage and who, after 22 years of marriage and 41 years of swallowing the same kind of comment from people who claimed to love her, was tired enough to give an honest answer. "Yes, Mr. Harvey," Patricia said quietly. "He does." The studio inhaled. Steve nodded slowly. "Miss Patricia," he said, "one more question, and then I am going to do the talking for a minute. Have you ever asked him to stop?" Patricia nodded. "Yes, Mr. Harvey," she said twice. The audience made a small, sad sound. Steve turned finally fully toward Bernard. Bernard had gone pale. The easy grin was gone. The performative confidence he had been trying to summon for 2 rounds had drained out of his face. Steve Harvey did not raise his voice. Steve Harvey did not point his finger. Steve Harvey simply stood in the middle of his stage, in the same place he had been standing for 14 years of hosting this show, and he fired back at Bernard Caldwell with the kind of clean, controlled, surgical precision that only comes from a man who has been thinking about these things for a long time. "Sir," Steve said, "I am going to tell you something, and I am not going to yell because yelling is what a man does when he is not sure of what he is saying. I am sure of what I am about to say, so I am going to say it calmly, and I want you to listen." The audience did not move. "Sir, in 22 years of marriage, you have been making a joke about your wife's body. A joke. That is the word you used. A joke. And tonight, on national television, in front of millions of viewers, in front of your daughters on this lineup, in front of your wife who is standing right next to you, you decided that joke was funny enough to be your opening answer in the second round of this game. Sir, I want you to understand something about what you just did. You did not tell a joke. A joke is something both people laugh at. What you just did was take a private wound. A wound you have been opening in your wife for 9 years, according to her own count. And you held it up in front of 200 strangers and millions of viewers, and you used it to try to be funny. Sir, that is not a joke. That is humiliation. And there is a word for what kind of husband does that to his wife in public. I am not going to say that word on national television. But you know what it is, and I think your wife knows what it is, and I think every woman watching this episode tonight knows what it is too. Bernard Caldwell's face had gone from pale to crumpled. He was no longer making eye contact with Steve. He was no longer making eye contact with anybody. He was looking at the buzzer in front of him as if the buzzer might suddenly grow a mouth and explain to him how he had ended up in this moment. Steve Harvey was not finished. He took one small step toward Bernard, just enough to close the distance between them. And he continued in the same calm voice. Sir, your wife asked you to stop twice. You did not stop. So I'm going to ask you something on her behalf, since she has clearly stopped asking on her own. Sir, do you love your wife? Bernard nodded quickly. Yes, Steve. Yes, I love her. Steve nodded back. Then I want you to do something right now, in front of these cameras. I want you to turn to your wife. I want you to look her in the eye, and I want you to tell her in your own words what you have actually been doing for the last 9 years. Not the version where it is a joke, the real version. The version where you have been wounding her in public and laughing about it. I want you to tell her that. The audience held its breath. Bernard slowly turned his body so that he was facing Patricia. Patricia raised her eyes. The two of them looked at each other across the small space between the buzzer and the lineup. Bernard's mouth opened. No sound came out at first. Then finally, in a voice so cracked it barely registered on the microphones, Bernard said, Patty, I have been hurting you. Patricia did not respond. She simply looked at him. Bernard tried again. Patty, I have been hurting you, and I have been calling it a joke, and I have been doing it in front of other people, and I have been doing it for a long time. The tears were starting now. He could barely get the words out. Baby, I am so sorry. I do not know why I did it. I do not know why I kept doing it after you asked me to stop. I think I thought if everybody else laughed, it meant it was okay. But it was not okay. It was never okay. I have been the worst kind of husband to you. I have been telling everybody else's joke at your expense. I am so sorry, Patty. I am so sorry. Patricia closed her eyes. The tears finally came. They were not loud tears. They were the same quiet tears she had been crying alone in her car for 9 years, only this time she was not alone. And the man who had been causing the tears was finally watching her cry them. After a long moment, Patricia opened her eyes. She looked at Bernard, and in a voice that was soft but absolutely clear, she said, Bernard, I do not know if I forgive you yet. I do not know if I will forgive you for a long time. But I appreciate you saying it out loud, because I have been waiting 9 years to hear you say it. Bernard nodded, sobbing. The audience could not move. Steve Harvey stepped back slightly, getting the two of them a small pocket of space in the middle of the stage. He looked at the cameras, briefly, and then he looked back at Patricia. Miss Patricia, he said, I want to tell you something. And I want every woman in this audience tonight, and every woman watching at home, to hear me say it too. The way your husband has been talking about your body in public is not love. It is not affection. It is not even teasing. It is a slow, public form of unkindness that builds up over years until a woman cannot eat a piece of cake at her own family barbecue without feeling like she has done something wrong. Miss Patricia, you have not done anything wrong. You did not do anything wrong when you were 8 years old at your mother's dinner table. You did not do anything wrong at 16 when you started eat. When you came on this stage in that beautiful burgundy dress and tried to do your husband one more favor by pretending his joke was funny, Patricia put one hand over her face. The audience could see her shoulders shaking quietly. Steve continued. Miss Patricia, there is one piece of cake in your future, somewhere, that you are going to eat in public, in front of people who love you, and nobody at that table is going to say a single word about it. And that piece of cake is going to taste better than any piece of cake you have ever eaten in your life. I want you to find that table. Miss Patricia, I do not know where it is, but I know it is out there waiting for you. And I want every other woman in this audience tonight who has been quietly eating in her car for the last 20 years to know that there is a table waiting for her too. The studio rose to its feet. It was not a roar. It was a steady, building, deliberate standing ovation. The kind of ovation that happens when a room of people has been told a truth they did not know they had been waiting to. Here. Patricia lowered her hand from her face. The small, careful smile was gone, but in its place was something else. Something that looked for the first time in a very long time like a woman who had just been seen fully. by a stranger holding a blue card on a stage in Atlanta. The episode aired 4 weeks later. The producers had aired the segment exactly as it had happened, unedited. The clip of Bernard Caldwell turning to his wife and saying, "I have been hurting you," and calling it a joke was viewed over 110 million times on social media in the first 10 days. But the clip that traveled even further, that ended up on therapy websites and women's magazine articles and the social media feeds of dozens of celebrities, was the clip of Steve Harvey describing the piece of cake in Patricia's future. The image of a table where a woman could eat in public without being commented on became, almost overnight, a kind of shorthand in body image conversations across the country. A Black women's health organization in Detroit started a campaign with the hashtag A Table for Patricia. T-shirts and coffee mugs followed. A national daytime talk show invited Patricia and Steve to come on together and discuss the segment. Patricia, characteristically, declined. She did not want any more attention. She wanted to go home and live her life. Patricia and Bernard did not separate. But Patricia, for the first time in their 22 years of marriage, set conditions on staying. She told Bernard, in a long conversation at their kitchen table the morning after they flew home from Atlanta, that she wanted him to start therapy with a male therapist of his own choosing, not a couples therapist, not someone Patricia knew, but somebody who could help Bernard understand why he had spent 9 years wounding his own wife. And calling it humor, Bernard had agreed. He had started therapy the following week. He had been going for 6 months by the time the follow-up segment was filmed. Patricia, for her part, continued her own twice-monthly sessions with Dr. Brooks. She also did something she had not done in 8 years. She started eating dinner in the dining room of her own house, at the dining room table with the lights on, where Bernard could see her. The first time she did it, Bernard sat across from her in silence for the entire meal, with tears running quietly down his face, and he did not say a single word about her plate. Patricia also did something else that nobody, including Steve Harvey, had predicted. She started writing, not for publication, just for herself. She bought a small lined notebook, the kind she used to use for her dental billing notes, and she started writing one sentence each night before bed about something she had eaten that day. Not the calories, not the weight, just the taste, just the memory. Just the small, ordinary pleasure of having eaten a meal, 6 months in. St. Full, Dr. Brooks had told Patricia, in their session that month, that what she was building inside that notebook was the slow, deliberate restoration of a relationship with food that her mother had taken from her when she was 8 years old. Patricia had nodded. She had not cried in Dr. Brooks's office. She had simply gone home, made herself a small plate of peach cobbler, and eaten it slowly at her own dining room table while Bernard read the newspaper across from her in respectful silence. 1 year later, Family Feud invited Patricia back for a follow-up segment. She came on alone, in the same burgundy dress. Although she had shortened the hem slightly and added a small gold brooch she had bought herself for her 50th birthday, she told Steve Harvey, sitting across from him on the same stage, that her marriage was still her marriage, that Bernard was a different man than the one who had stepped up to the buzzer a year earlier, and that she was slowly finding her table. She told him she had started a small Sunday afternoon dinner group at her church, a group of 6 women in their 40s and 50s who simply ate together once a month, with an unspoken agreement that nobody at the table would comment on anybody's plate. The group had become, in Patricia's quiet description, the most important standing appointment of her month. Steve Harvey shook his head slowly. "Miss Patricia," he said, "you found your table?" Patricia smiled, the small, careful smile her mother had taught her, but this time like Lorraine before her, and Cheryl, and Eleanor, and Denise, and Yvette, and Constance. The smile reached her eyes, and somewhere in a small ranch house on a quiet street in suburban Detroit, on a warm Sunday afternoon with the windows cracked open just enough to let in the early April air, an assistant manager at an auto parts retailer named Bernard Caldwell stood in his own kitchen, learning, for the first time in his 52 years of life, how to bake a cake. He was not very good at it, yet the first one had come out too dry, the second one had come out too flat. But he was making one again that Sunday, for his wife's church dinner group, because he had asked her if he could contribute something, and she had told him, very quietly, that he could try to make the cake. He was learning Patricia was already at the church. The cake would be late, but it would arrive, and nobody at the table would say a word about anybody's plate.